G'day and welcome back to the final episode of Talking Leadership TV for June. My guest today is Jimmy Smart. Jimmy's a university dropout turned successful corporate ladder climber and now social impact startup founder, and he's faced with a new challenge. He needs to adapt his people-first leadership style from a large corporate environment where he supported large teams to the small, dynamic and fast-paced world of the startup tech. Throughout his career, Jimmy has always believed that people are the driving force behind successful businesses. By creating what he sees as a positive and trust-filled environment that empowers individuals to do their best work. However, he does understand that the right environment is different for everyone, so understanding each individual's needs and why they turn up for work is critical to building a successful team. This approach proved invaluable during the pandemic when Jimmy led a brand team through one of the most turbulent, disruptive periods in their leadership journey. Despite the challenges of working remotely, Jimmy's focus on trust, empathy, celebration and impact helped his team not only survive but thrive. Thank you for following the podcast, but enough from me. I'll hand over to Jimmy. Your leadership and its beginnings, what's that story look like, mate?
Yeah, sure. Well, first and foremost, thanks for having me, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. Good question. So I guess I typically think about leadership mostly in the work environment. I had a few opportunities, I guess, to be in a leadership role in sporting life, footy teams and all those sorts of things. But probably the first chance to lead within the work environment came. I shifted from my home in Adelaide up to a place called Roxby Downs in South Australia. I was working for a company called the WorkPack Group. Their claim to fame is they're Australia's largest independently owned recruitment company. I'd spent probably about 12 months working as a recruitment coordinator. Like a lot of people that end up in recruitment, I sort of fell into that role. I did 6 months of a uni degree and quickly worked that structured learning wasn't necessarily my strong point. So had an opportunity to go and join that organisation and did so. And after a period of time, I got the opportunity to move from that recruitment coordinator role into what was called a team lead role. And there's actually a bit of an interesting story there because WorkPack they've got a really great system around how they use their commercial levers to drive business behaviours. And through the leadership lens, it was really quite interesting because I'd sort of come through this role where it was really intrinsically motivated. Typically with recruitment, there's always a heavy commissions, structure. And, a lot of what you're able to achieve from an earnings perspective comes from activity, output, placements. And all of those things, you are totally in the driver's seat to be able to go and actually achieve. And therefore you sort of get remunerated accordingly to how successful you are in that model. What they'd worked out, which was, ended up being a really transformational shift for me, was that once you move into a leadership role, all of your earnings capabilities are driven by the success of your team. So in the sense of if one of your team either aren't achieving commercial performance, if you basically lose a team member, if they're not achieving their financial goals with a set period of time, you actually get penalised for your team having done that. Vice versa, when you can build a team that is performing really well, that is achieving their own commercial goals, you actually have this ability to achieve almost exponential commission capability. So the reason that was interesting was that almost in the shift of, moving from my role of recruitment coordinator into recruitment team lead, it was this total shift in mindset to going, well, my performance is actually not the important thing anymore, because if I can't lead my team to the success that they want to achieve, then I actually can't be successful in my own right. So that was a really cool, journey for me to go down and started me along the pathway of what it is to be a leader and how to make sure that you're supporting and managing teams and, making sure that it's actually their success that becomes the focal point. So, if we were going sort of further beyond that leadership journey, from there, I got a taste for deserts for a while, and I moved from there up to the Pilbara in northern WA. And I got to lead our mining business up in a town called Tom Price. So that was a broader leadership role to actually look after a whole office and in fact a whole region rather than maybe just looking after the recruitment team. And then from there moved into national operations roles where I was able to lead a sales team across the business. And then probably my last leadership role within that part of the business was upon the period of COVID hitting, and basically leading a team of recruitment people across multiple states, which was interesting.
Thank you for the background setting there. It's an interesting pathway that you took, and I sometimes have asked my guests, and you've brought this back into a frame of attention for me. Is there's a point at which you switch your thinking from non-leadership roles to a leadership position, and what does success look like when you're the leader versus when you're not? And I think for some people it's a light bulb moment, and for others it's a, oh shit, what do I do now that I'm here? What does success look like, and how do you get a team to be a high performance team? Just if I can dig a little bit into that, because I'm curious fellow at the best of times. When you were leading your team, did you have a strategy to make them perform better? Was it an individual thing, or was it directed at the team as a whole?
Um, yeah, no, it's a good question. I guess it's that shift from me to we, right? And going from only having to look after yourself to actually being responsible for, the success and capability of those around you. I think there was a really interesting point, which I think was from one of your previous guests, and if not one of your previous guests, then another leadership podcast I might have been listening to. But they were talking about how a lot of the time, one of the things that doesn't get done is actually asking someone that's moving into a leadership role, hey, do you actually want to be managing other people? Right. And often that can be one of the things that either makes, a good or a bad leader. I don't know if that was across one of your
Yeah,
podcasts,
that
but
that was Mark Lebusque.
yeah.
That was one of the early ones. Yeah, he made that point quite strongly, and that hasn't escaped my thinking either. Is how often do people tap you on the shoulder and go, "Do you really want to work and lead people? Is that what you really want to do?" And I don't think. Well, sorry, I have to preface this by saying, in my experience, I haven't heard of anyone going through that process, but it's a really simple question that never get asked. And I think there's reasons for that, because in your context, obviously those who were your senior management team, leadership team, whatever they were called at the time, saw you and went, there's something in what Jimmy does that we want to move forward. Once they make that decision, there's an assumption that you want to do that. And I think you would probably potentially put some nose at a joint if you said, no, I'm happy just to keep doing what I'm doing, because I think there's still an assumption that my idea of what your career path should be is the right one if I'm more senior than you, and you just go along because I'm more senior than you. And I don't think that there's some ethical issues around that, but there's also just the professional courtesy of asking that question. But yeah, it doesn't get asked very much. Not maybe in your world it does. I've not heard of it much. No.
Yeah, and to be fair, I don't think anyone actually asked the question for me outright. I mean, for me, it was always, that was where I wanted to go. And in fact, one of the reasons I joined the business was I saw a really clear path to be able to get into a position where, I could be, leading teams. And that was a real clear, I guess, priority for me because, I've always, I guess, seen myself as a bit of a people person, had really great interpersonal skills, really loved what it is to be able to connect with people and understanding the motivations and give them the space and the capability and the knowledge to go and be the best person they can be. So I think for me there was always this really sort of natural gravitation to want to be able to get into a position where I could test my skills in that space and provide that capability. So when that came up, I was really looking forward to the challenge. And I think because um, I thought it was a relatively natural skill set of mine. I think I took to it relatively naturally. And because I had a real interest and curiosity and um, focus on the people element of the business and an understanding that it's always the people that drive the output, irrespective of how good an organization's systems and processes are. If you haven't got the right people in there, doing the day to day, then it's all for nothing. So, yeah, I was really glad to have found myself in that role, and I've really enjoyed my leadership journey from that first stage of looking after a small team right through to looking after large teams, and now into a slightly different dynamic in my new venture.
Yeah, it sounds very much like that's it's something you wanted to do. I guess in the context of Mark's comment, it's for those that maybe haven't given it too much thought. And again, we're all in jobs for very different reasons. And knowing that that's what you wanted to do, I guess you lucked out because you were in the right job. You had that as your career focus, and it's probably good that your seniors know that you have that as a potential career goal, because things change in organizations and they can change fairly quickly overnight to one day you've got a senior manager that leaves and the next they need to replace that person. And so if that's your shot, it is what it is. Can we move on to, and I'm interested to get your feedback here, is how do you define leadership, mate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure it's different for everyone. So obviously that hence the specificity around my definition. Um, and I'm not sure if everyone does this, but I had my panic moment before and thought, oh, I'm not sure if I've got something interesting to say there. I better go and have a look at what's out there, and what maybe some of the common examples are. Um, and probably the interesting thing that I came across was that I think the the common one you see is leadership is the ability to inspire and guide a group of people towards a common goal. Probably the one thing that I thought that terminology misses is the importance of making sure that underneath that common goal is the understanding and appreciation that the group of individuals that make up that team also have their own individual goals. And if you're not paying attention and time to be able to making sure that you're, cultivating and nurturing and supporting each of those individuals and their own personal goals, you are definitely doing a disservice to be able to go and achieve that overarching, shared goal. So yeah, the other one that I came across, which resonated, maybe because we've had some recent um, interest in starting some gardening here at home, and we started a vegetable patch. But one of the other analogies I came across is leadership is being a gardener, right? And through the vegetable patch analogy, you've got to understand how different plants thrive in different environments, and some thrive in high stress, low watering environments, whereas others, need shade and they need constant watering, and they have a much, I guess, um, um, higher frequency or higher touch preference. And it's no different with a team of individuals, right? It's so important to understand why people show up to work, what are their motivators, what are they trying to achieve, what's important to them, and creating a space which is unique to each of those individuals within the team. And then when you can do that across the breadth of the team that you might be leading, that's when you have the opportunity to build something that has the opportunity to flourish as a collective.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it always comes back to the leadership process is around people and understanding that you're dealing with other human beings. And that the wisdom, if anything, I've drawn from my guests is that it is a people game, and to understand what motivates someone's important. Um, in as much as it's also you're working in the context of a business, and there's this conversation, this part of the conversation leads nicely into the next area. Now, I'd like your perspective, if you could, around what you see as a key leadership issue from a corporate perspective, and you've had that experience, to potentially a social enterprise perspective. What key issue in each of those resonate with you from a leader perspective?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I think probably if I was to pull a singular theme that either has the ability to provide the most benefit, but also has the ability to provide the most turbulence, um, is when an organization um, either performs well or poorly when it comes to communicating to their business. Um, And in the sense of when you do it well and you do it transparently and you do it with empathy, um, you've got the ability to create a really trust-centric and um, engaged workforce. And even when what's coming through isn't necessarily a positive message, um, you still have the ability to navigate challenging circumstances compared to when you do communication poorly and you're either doing it, you know, trying to sugarcoat a message which doesn't need sugarcoating, or if you're doing it without enough lead time, or if you're doing it without um, a level of empathy. Poor communication is always the thing that I see have the biggest negative impact across a business. And I guess um, a really common example across that was across the pandemic, right? And I think the WorkPack business did it really well in the sense of um, when you can approach it for what it is. And the reality was, like a lot of businesses, right, there was redundancies, there was restructures, there was really unfortunate things happening. It still all comes down to the messaging and being transparent and um, you know not trying to downplay the severity of the message. I guess I'm not articulating that very well.
No,
Um,
no, that makes sense. I think part of what you're saying is don't BS the people that you're working with, because it destroys confidence in any other messaging. I've seen that be destructive in multiple settings where all this individual needed to do was just deliver the frank and honest truth about what's going on. I think people, as much as it might impact them, you respect someone for telling you what's what, because the story I've heard from others, and I want to get some of these people to talk to me on a podcast like I did with yourself, is to say, and this was the analogy that was put to me, is if you went to a doctor and the doctor started BSing you or sugarcoating what you've got, that's not going to be good for your long-term health. If there's something not quite right, you need to know. And so I know exactly what you're talking about, a degree of authenticity and genuineness in how you communicate. Is that kind of where you're going?
yeah, you nailed it, and thank you for putting that much more eloquently than I was able to. But you're
Thank
exactly
you.
right. Like if you lack or if you've got insincerity, then that destroys trust, right? Whereas if you come in and you say, guys, this sucks, there's no two ways about it. We're losing our friends, we're losing colleagues, um, and there's going to be impacts across the business. You're starting from a point of trust where you can actually then stimulate conversation coming back to be able to gather feedback, understand the challenges and the points of views from across an organization, and be able to deal with them as best as you possibly can,
Mm.
compared to if you come in with the insincere messaging and try and polish the turd for a very for a very ineloquent analogy. But yeah, so you summarise that well.
It makes sense. You really do want to hear the truth coming from people that are there to actually lead the joint. And sometimes it's just bad news. It's just bad news. And I heard some stories through COVID. Now, I made the mistake partway through the pandemic, probably halfway through the worst of it, and I was being a judgy piece of crap. And I hate doing this, but thought, oh, businesses that aren't keeping people on, they're just hateful, spiteful human beings that don't want to keep their staff on to save money. Businesses were at a pretty shitty point in their existence. And so I can freely admit I made a mistake. Now I understand why it was terrible looking back now, but it speaks to the mindset I had, and I don't have this mindset anymore, that when you're in the world of work, or be that for profit or not for profit, shit can change very quickly. And the adaptability of leaders is one thing, but it's also, how do you inculcate a culture that allows you to have those conversations? And I think it's more difficult. By the sounds of it, you create an environment where those conversations can happen, but there are businesses where that doesn't happen. And so
It tests your capabilities in that regard. And in that context, Jimmy, if I can from you, what are your list of key leader capabilities? Now, there is no right or wrong set of capabilities here, just the ones that are the most prominent for you. And just so I don't forget, there is no definitive definition of leadership. I've heard multiple permutations of what it is, and everyone has a kernel of authenticity to it. And I think you couldn't get a bunch of leaders in a room to agree on one definition because of the nature of leadership, which is a process, not a set one thing. Because if it was, you wouldn't have people working in this space all the time trying to develop leaders, because we would all know what the answer is and kind of move on and do something else. So, but getting back to the question here, your key leader capabilities.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of them stem from, I guess, my key focus as a leader, which is always to put people first, right? And the things that I've found that have built the best cultures and empowered, the best teams. Probably start with a couple of things that you hear a lot around, leadership, and probably that come up a lot in these sorts of podcasts. But I think empathy is one of the biggest things. If you can display real empathy, where you can come from a position that understands um, everyone's individual points of view, their priorities, their motivators, their drivers, that puts you in a really great position to be able to understand how everyone best fits into the broader, I guess, space across a team. Empathy is one really big one. Trust is an absolute must, which we already spoke about. If people don't trust you, um, certainly you won't be able to get the best out of them. You certainly won't be able to have honest and upfront conversations around, whether there's challenges, whether there's frustrations, whether there's, issues, and all those sorts of things. I think a big one for me is fun. Like, you've got to find ways to be able to weave, fun and enjoyment into the day-to-day work of leadership. And that can take any number of forms, like, whether it's, I think in the modern age, if you haven't got a meme channel, across your team, there's something seriously wrong. We used to do things like have vocab points, where you'd have a word of the day that you had to work into one of your conversations as part of your normal business. And, you basically get your tally of across the week, and you've got a vocab champion that you celebrate at the end of each week. Um, and anything that you can do to sort of, find opportunities to laugh and enjoy each other's company, I think is imperative. And it's probably become more difficult, other than the memes part, in the distributed work world that we now live in. And then sort of adjacent to the fun is, I think, recognition is massive for me, as far as what I think is an important part of creating a great culture and being a great leader. Um, One of the important sort of, I guess, one of the important subcategories of celebration is making sure that you're not just celebrating one type of output. So typically in a business, you might have a KPI related celebration. So the person that's done the most calls, the person that's made the most placements, the person that's had, the greatest overall output. But when you start to think about, okay, well, not knowing that not everyone here is either inclined to have that as their standard operating procedure, and that's not necessarily a motivator for everyone. Like, for me, it was really important to have two or three different recognition points, not just, performance output related, but also around, whether it was culture, whether it was around mentoring, whether it was around community building, culture building. And so for me, I made it a personal, I guess, focus to be able to recognize everyone for each of their different strengths. when they were, bringing those particular things to the table.
One question I wanted to ask you is you seem to be very focused on the team, and that there's no issue with that. But in terms of your own practice, do you take time to do the that introspective gig, looking at your own practice, and actually take some time out of your work week to think about an issue or a point in time where you've gone, shit, that could have gone better. What could I have done differently? Do you do that kind of introspective stop gap at any point in time? I'm curious, and I'm going to be asking this more of future guests, in that it's one thing to be focused on others, and I think that's critical if you're going to be an effective leader, but there's also that management of self. So is that something you do on a regular, or only when there's key stress moments in your leadership process?
Yeah, it's good. I mean, and I'll often probably look to others for feedback in how I'm doing. And so whether that's peer feedback, whether that's seeking feedback from those that, might have been my seniors within that organization, and certainly had lots of value from, particularly those structured feedback opportunities where, there is the opportunity to say, hey, what did I do well? What could have I done better? Were there any specific examples where you didn't get what you needed from me? And, we can make sure that there's opportunities to improve on that moving forward. I'm just trying to think whether there was sort of other opportunities where you can sort of, take that stopgap and review what you're doing. But I think I probably typically aim to go and seek feedback from others rather than do that introspective piece, which maybe needs to be something I get better at.
Oh, and I'm asking just out of curiosity, because I know that, and I only had a small window of time in a senior leadership role comparative to others, and I could have done more on that front, to be honest, because I didn't seek that external feedback as much as I needed to, because there's always a fear that someone's going to say some stuff that you're going to go, hey, not liking that, and separating the personal from the professional can be difficult sometimes when you're in a leadership role, because you think it's all on you when it's really not the case. But that's an Eric thing. It's not a Jimmy thing, that's for sure. And I'm growing more and more curious around how people adapt their own practice. So obviously you look to others to give you that feedback, and more power to you for doing that. I'm just curious to see how that one plays out. And I think there is a level of security in your own practice if you're prepared to go out to others to get that feedback, because you'll have colleagues that'll give it to you raw, and that's good to know. But it's also, you really want constructive feedback, not destructive feedback. And that's the risk you take when you ask someone else to give you a bit of a breakdown of how it is that you're going.
And maybe just to wrap that one up, like, I guess one of my biggest adaptions since coming out of the corporate world, of which there was, again, in the WorkPack example, circa 500 or 600 employees, where there are large teams, you've got both upwards and downwards, I guess, reporting capabilities, and there's a never-ending list of people that you can go and actually seek that feedback from, or that you're actually getting that, by virtue of normal, I guess, business processes. So to go from that into, a brand new social venture, which is a technology startup, where literally I've been, employee number one for the last, circa 14 months. Now I haven't got those reference points to say, hey, how am I doing? What could I do better? So that's actually been a real challenge for me, as far as going, okay, well, where are my points of calibration? And I've had to go and, seek that from, the board instead, or mentors, or partners, or, wherever I can go and get it, which was just a real, I guess, point of adaptation for me, and something that I had to try and adjust to.
Oh, it's good to hear that you're doing that, reaching out to a mentor or a coach or other people in that that founder space, that social enterprise space where you can have the chat. There's plenty of people in that space that'll give you a good oil on what you're doing and give you their experience. And that's all you can really draw from is what worked for you and what didn't, and what lessons can you draw from that. But that's easy for someone like me to say, because I've never done what you've done. And it's hard when you think you don't have that network, but you've probably got that environment set up. It's adapting it to the new situation that's always a bit of a challenge. And we could do another podcast on that, and I think we will at some point, but I won't hit you and stress you about that at the moment. But I will ask you this: through the COVID process now, I'm assuming here that we're sort of at the tail end of the worst impacts of COVID. Touch wood that that doesn't change anytime soon. Do you think leadership practice was impacted through COVID from your experience, or it stayed the same, or somewhere in between?
I mean, I think there was definitely some um, shifts in what every leader had to do, right, as far as what the pandemic forced on what was business as usual. So whether that was, shifting to a full remote and now semi-remote, work environment, and having to adapt to, having team in the office, and, being able to call meetings if you had to at, relatively short notice, or, being able to have that sort of person-to-person opportunity for collaborating and culture and all those sorts of things. And people have had to adapt to, okay, well, what does that look like now in a hybrid work environment? How do we maintain culture? How do we keep people connected? How do we make sure that if someone's having a bad day and needs support, that we can provide that support, right? Because before, all you had to do was look around the corner and you could have seen one of your team members that, might have looked overly stressed, or might have something going on in their lives where you could, literally take that cue and go and provide some support. So I think everyone's sort of having to make changes in how to do that. I think there's been changes for the better too, of course, like, the ability to, for everyone to have a level of comfort that you don't need to be in the office, all the time, and that, this shift towards outcome-based, management, where as long as people are delivering on, what they're brought into the business to do, then, if they're taking early afternoons to go and pick their kids up, if they're taking a day off, all that sort of stuff, like, I think there's just a more equitable and sustainable work environment, at least in a lot of spaces. Like if you're retail or those sorts of things, then maybe not so much. But so I think there's definitely been, good and bad changes to business that are, or, not necessarily bad, but challenges to overcome.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think we're going to see more of the fallout, good and bad, in the next coming half decade or so, and lots of books being written on what did we go through that space. And there'll be a lot of not just navel gazing, but looking back and looking at things through rose-colored glasses, and that maybe wasn't so bad. And I think in some sectors it was terrible, and some people went through some really bad stuff, and in others not so much because of the nature of the work. And if I, as someone who is a leadership tragic, is going to draw anything from this, it's that the training and development and understanding of what leadership is for those in leadership roles was highlighted through COVID as, in some circumstances, being great, in others not so great, but not to the extent where you can point a finger at someone, because nobody saw this shit coming. It hit, and businesses either adapted or they didn't. And so the resilience of your business in some ways has nothing to do with you personally as a leader, because if your circumstances changed, you couldn't get product to market, or countries were locked up, no amount of good leadership is going to change that. So it kind of is what it is. So I have stopped being judgy in that regard, because I didn't live through the most harrowing part of it, because I worked from home and I was in that hybrid work environment for about 8 years. So this wasn't new to me, but to see the reactions of some people, I really understood what it meant for some to want the social interaction. Because as a introvert myself, being in a home office and doing my gig 9 to 5, perfect. I need my own headspace. I can just get the job done. I don't need others to get energized to do what I need to do. But there are other fellow human beings that get their kick of the day, the week, to be around other people. And when you couldn't have that, I understand why some people got really stressed through that process. And like I said, there's more outcomes to this, but we're going to focus on you. So let me ask you the following, Jimmy. The nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or are they made?
Yeah, I've thought a bit about that, and I think at least my opinion is nurture. But I think the nurturing that shapes a leader happens from a really, really young age. And again, if we put people at the center of what leadership is, a lot of it comes from, I think, an upbringing, your set of beliefs, what you were taught, what it is to be a good human being, and how you can, use that to go and help, inspire and lead and encourage others. And as I was thinking about it, there was probably two formative moments that played a part in, I guess, my broader leadership journey as it ended up materializing. And one was, well, they were both examples of where I remember my parents being really proud of me because of the actions that I took. And one was when I got the Welcomer Award in reception. So I must have been 5 years old or something. And, way beyond any academic achievement or a score on a test, like I remember explicitly how proud my mum was when I got issued the Welcomer Award, which basically highlighted that I was the person that would go out of my way to go and, find the new kids and making sure that they had someone to play with, and that, that everyone was included, and, all these sorts of things, which, for me at that really early age instilled that, you should always be doing what you can to look after other people and all those sorts of things. So then the other one was when I think I was maybe in year 10, and I overheard my dad talking about a call that he'd got from the school. And basically what it was, there was a new kid that had just started, there's a common theme here, and he'd actually been in an unprovoked assault. And basically one of the other kids had assaulted this guy when he'd just gone to ask for his football back. And anyway, I'd heard about it, and I sort of took the opportunity to go and confront the gentleman that had assaulted this new kid, and had a chance to basically, not resolve the issue because he couldn't unassault him, but at least bring a level of justice to make sure that there was some retribution from a faculty perspective, and give this new kid a chance to, I guess, have some sort of resolution. And I remember my dad talking about the fact that how proud he was that his son had sort of gone out of his way to go and, I guess, action an injustice. Which between those two experiences, I think, those sorts of things are then what you take into your leadership journey, and it provides that framework and those beliefs that, make sure you are, welcoming people into your team or your organization, providing a safe space, making sure they can feel included, making sure that you're not letting injustices go by, and making sure that you are, fighting for the rights of those that might need you to do so.
That's really interesting, mate. That's an old soul in a young person's mind. And because I've met some people like you, younger, that were trying to get some equity in some things. Didn't always succeed, but you could tell they were people, and that comes up. That comes up in discussions around the nature versus nurture, and some people have that nurtured through their growth into maturity, or it's just part of their nature that gets developed down the track. But again, if you hadn't identified that as a leadership thing that you wanted to pursue, it's a choice to go that way, and you may never have wanted to do it, but I think it was inevitable that you got to a point where you were doing what you're doing, and that's always a mixed bag depending on the environment that you've got. I'm still, I fall sort of an 80-20 thing, that most of it is nurture, but there's some nature to it. And the more people I talk to, the more I probably couldn't be convinced that it's 100% of one or 100% of the other. I don't think the magnitude of that, you couldn't convince me, but maybe someone out there will one day, one or the other. But I'm open to having my mind changed. Jimmy, final question for you, mate. Looking back on your leadership pathway, what would you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader?
I would probably continue with the same theme, which is that leadership's not rocket science, and if you treat people well and respect people and build trust, the rest of it you can work out. Particularly if you're new into leadership, as long as you can do that, you can. If there's a technical element of leadership that you need to work out, not only will you be given the time to do so, but you'll actually likely really encourage people to come and bring you along that journey. My last role in leadership was a shift from leading that recruitment team post-pandemic and into a brand new role for me, which was technology. So moving into the technology team within the WorkPack business. And I think when you start with that position of empathy, trust, and the level of honesty that, hey, I'm coming in here and have a lot of learning to do to be able to effectively lead this team. That's the thing that actually helped people, come around you and help sort of develop that skill set from a technical capability while you're, doing all the other stuff that might be more of those, I guess, softer leadership skills. So I think what I would tell my younger self is always put people first, and the rest you'll be able to work out.
Words of wisdom, Jimmy. Thank you for your time today, mate. It's been great.
Been a pleasure. Thanks, Eric.
I'd like to thank Jimmy for his time today and sharing his insights, particularly those around empathy and understanding from a leadership point of view why people are in the world of work and how does that help you create a better environment for the teams that you're leading. Thanks again for following the podcast. As always, drop a like if you're into the content, or if you can help me, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks again. Have a great day, rest of your week, and we'll catch you all in July for the next series of Talking Leadership TV.